Hello everyone and welcome to the FinTech Times. My name's Tyler and today I'm here at the PAY360 Summit in London. And here I'm joined by Will. Will, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Great. Well, before we go any further, I'd like you just to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about where you've come from.
Certainly, yeah. So I'm Will Billingsley, one of the three co-founders at ApTap, where we're essentially trying to help banks connect with merchants to basically enable customers to take action around their bills and subscriptions. So that could be cancelling services, that could be signing up to new ones, that could be anything from accessing discounts or renegotiating bills, whatever that may be, trying to bring that experience into the banking experience at its most kind of baseline, I guess.
Well, that sounds very interesting. I think it's something that I myself would use quite a lot. So yes, today we're here and we're talking about everything PayTech related,
Sure.
anything and everything PayTech. I think, one of the biggest changes we've seen in the industry this year is the introduction of new regulation. We saw just the other week, in fact, the strong customer authentication regulation came into full force. Is it adding friction? Is it not? That's still, in some cases it is, some cases it isn't.
Yeah.
But how do you think the regulation space has played with FinTech this year?
I mean, well, we're just at the beginning of the year, I guess.
Yeah.
So with things like the kind of VRP mandates coming through, it's an exciting time. I think we're moving in the right direction. There's probably a little bit of concern around just the pace in which that's moving. We're a relatively small FinTech company, and we'd like to just push things through and go and test and learn. But when you're a regulator mandating things across the nation, there's going to be a little bit of, let's say, a little bit more along the thought process, let's put it nicely, as to when and how certain things are implemented. So, look, I think we're pretty positive around kind of the evolution of open banking, the use cases that are coming out the back of it, how that impacts kind of payments and payment rails, things like request to pay coming through as well. We're super excited by this, but it's just, I think the regulator needs to leave enough wiggle room for us as fintechs, for other players in the market, just to experiment a little bit,
I completely agree with you. I think regulation is good. I think it's really good, but it needs to sort of have like a workable lens.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As you said, we are at the beginning of the year. Things could change drastically. You never know. Fingers crossed. That's very, very interesting, and especially when we focus about more on what the regulation is looking at. In terms of the PayTech models that have arisen throughout last year and the beginning of this year, which ones are you most excited to see?
Yeah, I kind of name dropped a couple, right? Variable recurring payments. I think for us as someone who's trying to help, or a business that's trying to help, the likes of the British Gases, the BTs, insurance providers, whoever, these merchants connect with customers through this financial management experience. Something like VRP or request to pay is going to be super exciting for us, right? We're not necessarily dealing with POS or card payments. For us, it's the regular transactions, the ones you're making monthly, bi-monthly, every 6 months, every year, that we're really interested in as a business. And if we can help bring some kind of clarity and control to our consumers, through our banking partners, then that's only going to be a positive, not only for the consumer, but then for the bank themselves and for the merchant as well. So if you're able to then manage a recurring payment on a more flexible basis, then for us that's, I think, fundamental. It puts the user in control. It's about how does the user get more autonomy and a more ownership over their data at a baseline. And Francesco from TrueLayer was just chatting about it in one of the conference halls. Data and payments are intrinsically tied together. I think if you can have more autonomy over your data, you then have the ability to make more informed decisions, and payments and the rails behind those payments are going to, I guess, help consumers leverage their newfound confidence, let's hope. Yeah.
Leon, I think it's really interesting that you're working in sort of the recurring payment space. Do you think that there has been wider flexibility in that space from what you've seen?
I mean, it's slowly but surely, right?
Yeah.
We're in a place where direct debits and standing orders and kind of the CPA, the card-based payments are the norm. Customers get, they understand how that all works and how to set them up and how to switch them between bank accounts. Not that many people are switching bank accounts, but as we've seen the FCA remove the 90-day authentication around like data, the AIS procedures. And I think as consumers get more and more comfortable with not only how they're sharing data, but then how payments play into the data sharing, we're going to see just more organic uptake of these models. And what is it, like 5 million people have used open banking products to date in the UK. We're such a small fraction of what we can do so far. So we are cautiously optimistic about what these kind of new payment rails can do. Ultimately, I think the use cases will be the things that drive them forward. We're talking about contactless and how TfL really spurred that on. What's it going to be for open banking, for VRP, for request to pay? What are the catalysts to make that happen? And hopefully ApTap we can be one of those. But I think that relationship between user and whoever they're paying, whichever services they're paying for on a recurring basis, that's going to be fundamental in how we move these kind of things forward.
Yeah, I completely agree, and especially with what you said about data, the use of data has become so important to paytechs and the wider fintech scene.
Yeah, certainly.
It really helps to drive a sense of personalization that people are looking for, and I think that it helps to adhere to customer demands. In terms of, we're obviously moving at a very fast pace within the industry.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested to know how we can make these products more accessible and wider reaching to the masses.
So I guess, anecdotally or more specifically to ApTap, we've taken the approach of how do we get these tools as close to consumers as fast as possible. And I think the place in which we're doing that is, the place in which we're doing that is within someone's bank. You're accessing your bank account at least a few days every week on average. And it should be there in which we're surfacing products and services that are going to help you become more confident in your financial position. They're going to help, we're going to center what we put in front of you around consumer well-being. We see the price of living, inflation, the energy markets crashing. We need to be really empowering the consumer, because I think the kind of fallout or the trickle down from helping a consumer be more confident is then intrinsic to a more sustainable business model for ourselves, for a financial institution, for a merchant. And I think if the consumer is educated around what they're sharing, when they're sharing it, how they're paying for things, how often, how much, then we're going to have this is what the CMA wanted, right, when they're mandating open banking. We're going to have a more competitive environment. We're going to have better products and services. And it's, I guess it's kind of capitalism at its core, but that's what we kind of strive towards, I guess, as a business at the end of the day.
I think, you're bang on the money there with when you mention financial education, because we're very privileged in this space, at least, that we have a very comprehensive knowledge of how it works. But the average person on the street will probably have no idea. So I think you're right in saying that it really should be pushed forward with awareness and education around it, because it's as well as technology.
But it's how do you make that engaging, right? Like if you ask anyone from every major financial institution, they'll say we're trying to educate our customers, and it's really not an easy thing to do.
No.
But how do you do it in a way that's pertinent to who they are as an individual at some sort of scale? So not just a blog post on why you should be switching your energy, which is very much, energy probably a bad example at the moment, but that's very much the foundation or part of our business. But why should you, Tyler, specifically, why should Will Billingsley specifically be moving from this broadband provider to this broadband provider? That's again anecdotal to who ApTap or what ApTap is as a business, but there's so many use cases in that, and I think you have to. The opening up of these data sets means that we can get kind of more bespoke at scale for consumers. It's not just a one size fits all. Here's a generic blog post about how to save money. Right?
Yeah, it's got to be really engaging, hasn't it? You know, because it's not an easy topic to wrap your head around.
No.
And we're very fortunate to be joined by so many industry leaders here. I mean, we are in London, and that is one of the big financial capitals of the world.
Yeah.
I don't want this next question to be too London centric.
Yeah.
But my next question to you is how has the UK positioned itself, which it looks like it's doing, positioned itself as a leader of pay tech, as a leader of payments. What's your view on that?
I think one, we kind of have to, based on as a country what our kind of economic output looks like. I won't comment on what Brexit's done to the country and that sort of thing, but it's, fundamentally we are leaders in the finance space between New York, Singapore, London. We're talking, major Hong Kong, whatever. We're talking major hubs, and the old saying is money makes the world go round. So if we can position ourselves there, then the UK can continue to be a superpower, let's say, on a more kind of global economics spectrum. But in terms of, specifically how we do that, we've got a pretty forward-thinking regulator. I think as a smaller startup in the space, we've been pleasantly surprised just how malleable the regulator can be, just how much you can go back and forward with them and really have a conversation about what we want to do and how we want to implement it. And that, I think, is really, really important. But I was having some conversations the other day with folks from the PSR and the CMA, talking about OBIE, the Open Banking Implementation Authority and entity, and just how that's grown to be this behemoth organization. And that wasn't the idea initially, right? That was brought in to help open banking or lay the foundations of open banking and kind of work through some of the use cases in it. And now they're essentially a regulator in and of themselves. So I think we need to be aware of just how much work it is. There needs to be, like I said earlier, I think you need to carve some space out to allow fintechs, to allow incumbents like the MasterCards or whoever of the world to have a little bit of wiggle room to do and try and break and build. Because otherwise you're going to end up so stoic and so just set in about a way that we'll fall behind. This is like you said, this is a space that's continuously progressing and moving. I think a regulator is, if they're tied to a government, they're more generally just going to be slower than an individual business can be. And then, you look at something the size of a MasterCard compared to something the size of an ApTap, of course we can move faster. So there needs to be, I guess it's about tiering, who can do what and how they can do it. And things like the agency model that the regulator brought through for, open banking licenses through the FCA, that's really helped companies like us get on our feet, build some foundations out, and really start to kind of implement these use cases. So, let's continue in that kind of vein, is what I would say.
We'll have to come back this time next year and see what rings true. But it was really great to speak to you today.
A pleasure, thank you.
And thank you for joining us. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the event.
Yeah, I'm sure I will.
Thank you very much.